So this notion of deep identity is something that I developed after years of observing how people interact with themselves and with each other. All of us have an identity. All of us have a way that we exist in the world, how we dress, how we act, how we walk down the street. All of those things are determined by our identity, by our culture. Child psychologists say that children develop the ability for concrete, rational, and abstract thinking somewhere around 7 years old. Some folks are a little bit earlier, like maybe 6. Some folks are a little bit slower, maybe 8 or even 9. But somewhere in that range, you're going to develop the ability to think rationally about your world, your life, etc. Now, by the time you're 7 years old, large parts of your identity, of yourself, is already in place. Those parts of your identity were put in place, and you lacked the capacity to think about it. Because this goes so deep, I call that part of your identity deep identity. The parts of so the definition is the parts of your identity that you acquired before you acquired the capacity for rational thought. Deep conflict are the areas of conflict where your deep identity will conflict with another person's deep identity, and neither of you can think about the conflict that's going on. All you do is react to the conflict. So where do we experience deep identity? Where are the places we'll experience the notion of deep identity? So I've identified 5 primary aspects of deep identity. Number 1 is race, ethnicity, and culture. And right away, you know I'm cheating because you know that race is different from ethnicity, and ethnicity is different from culture, because almost all of you, according to my survey, went to college, went to have graduate degrees, have professional training, etc., and you know all this stuff. But you didn't know it when you were 3 years old, when you started picking up your responses on how do you interact with people who are different from you. Now, living in Portland, Oregon, I am, for lots of people, the first person their child sees of color. Okay, and I'm talking about, 8 or 9 months old. Okay, and it's a very simple formula. The kid will look at me, will stop, and then will look up at its mother. It will take the cue of its mother in terms of how do you deal with this strange being with this dark skin. And if the mother says, "Hi, Shariff, how are you doing?" And if I get a hug, then the kid will light up and say, "Oh, well, here's something new," and that'll be the end of that. If the mother says, "Come over here, I got to protect you now," then deep in their deep identity, they're going to be associating skin color and threat. Okay. Now, I am sure the mother didn't intend it. If she's thinking about it, she'd do it differently, but that's not how we deal with deep identity situations. Okay. Language is the second part of deep identity. And most people, when they're in the presence of people speaking a different language from them, get tense, get stressed, will be upset, and they don't know why. Well, the reason they don't know why is because it's part of their deep identity. They can't think about it. They have the irrational belief that the person is saying something about them and is saying something um, something bad about them. Okay, the third part of deep identity is class. And class plays itself out differently in our society nowadays when people can borrow money to look like they're in a different class. If the financial system ever collapsed, you're going to find out exactly how many people who think of themselves as middle class are not. But in a lot of societies, and in the society where that I was raised in, where you live, what you do, who you associate with, what schools you go to, is all based around your class, what side of the tracks you were raised on. Our fourth aspect of deep identity is religion. Again, nowadays, people are moving around and acting differently than they did 20, 30, 40 years ago. But in the rest of the world, religion, again, who you associate with, what schools you go to, the clothes that you are wearing is all based on a religion. And you get all this stuff before 7 years old. Even if you're not raised in a religious household, you get that before you're 7 years old, and therefore you don't understand what all these other people are, what's making them tick. The last one is gender. From the time you came home from the hospital and you were wrapped in a blue blanket if you were a boy, and a pink blanket if you were a girl, people treated you differently. Again, research shows that people who can't tell the gender of a child will not interact with that child and be very uneasy around the child. They don't know how to interact with the child because all those interactions are a part of your deep identity. If we look carefully at these 5 elements of deep identity, the first 4 are the reasons or the justifications for the wars that we have on our planet right now. The Carter Center is tracking 90 to 100 different wars happening. Most Americans don't even know about them. Most Americans don't even know about the wars we create. But some combination of race, ethnicity, and culture, some combination with language, class, and religion are the things that make our world so violent a place. And gender is the place where the women catch the brunt of the violence in modern warfare. So all of us are affected by deep identity and are affected by deep conflict. So our challenge is, how can I reduce deep conflict? How can I become aware of the places in my own being that I'm not aware of? Well, one exercise we do when we have time for exercises is I want you to help me see my deep identity. Just ask me, is that a deep identity issue? The reason that you wave your hands around like that. Well, definitely. But you can help me see my deep identity, and then I can help you see yours. I can help you to become more aware. I can help, and this is what I ask people to do. Take a step back from your own deep identity. Ask yourself the question, is this something that is a part of humanity, or is this just something I picked up along the way? To invite others to become aware of their own deep identity, to be able to see what deep identity is. Okay, so we are going to do an exercise. We're going to look at the intersection of a number of aspects of deep identity. And what I want to do is use the reality of Hurricane Katrina as a backdrop for looking at this intersection of race, culture, and class. So I'll show you a couple of news clippings. Here's one, and I will read it for the folks in the who are doing this just by audio. It's Associated Press. A young man walks through chest-deep flood waters after looting a grocery store in New Orleans on Tuesday, August 30th, so on and so forth. Okay, so this guy here is a looter. I want to show you another clip. 2 residents wade through chest-deep water after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store after Hurricane Katrina came through the area, and such and so on and so forth. Okay, these people are finders. So what's the difference between the 2 pictures? What's the difference between a looter and a finder? Well, for those of us who can see it, the race of the looter is black and the race of the finders is white. And so I want us to be very, very careful with this. I don't believe that the Associated Press reporter who was writing this was racist in the sense of saying, aha, here's a black guy, let me put him down, let me put him in his place. I don't think he thought about it at all. I think floating around in this deep identity is this association that blacks steal things and whites are resilient, and if they took it out of the store, they must have really needed it. They're basically good people. They're basically normal people, okay? And this is a very clear and powerful example, though, of something that needs to be dealt with in our society. And the processes that we're using, that I'm using, are processes that will help us to get to this, get to these issues.